Welcome back to another episode of the How To Home podcast. And today we've got Pat Copps here from Orkin with an episode that's truly going to make your skin crawl. Welcome back to another episode of the How To Home podcast. My name is Aaron Massey and joined as always by Tracy Pendergast. And our guest today is Pat Copps, a entomologist and technical manager with Orkin. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate being here.
Our topic today is pest control, something that I am always in the midst of with my home. And I really want to pick your brain about some pest control options out there, some of the best practices. You know, there's so many different pests across the country, regionally, and even city to city that, the average homeowner deals with on a day-to-day basis. And I think having somebody with your background here is just going to provide a ton of knowledge for the audience and for myself.
I'm really excited. Is it normal to be this excited to talk about bugs?
Oh, it is for me. Because if you're an entomologist, it is.
Yeah, I feel
exciting.
Like everyone, this is the struggle everyone deals with. So I'm excited to get some tips.
How'd you get into it, first of all? I'm very curious. How'd you get into entomology and background in what you're into?
Well, I was one of those kids that used to watch the ants when he was a kid and run around and look at all the different critters. Being raised out in the country, I had a lot of access to critters. So brought just about everything home, raised all kinds of different pets that probably shouldn't have been considered pets, even crickets and things like that. Bring them home, try to keep them over the winter. And just enjoyed being around critters. So it was kind of a natural thing to me to think about studying entomology.
But hey, you never know. You never know where you're going to end up. You pulled some facts about pest control.
I sure did.
Do you want to dive into a few of them?
I would love to. They're highly disturbing.
Yes.
First of all.
Certainly.
Yeah.
So over 56% of homeowners have had a problem with ants in the last year. That's not a surprising fact.
I
right?
actually would think higher than that for
Well,
ants.
here in California, it is higher.
Yeah.
But if we're looking nationwide, that's probably the right number.
That's a good point, yes. A single flea can lay up to 25 eggs per day, while, everyone, hold on to your hats, a single rat can have up to 84 offspring per year. One single rat can have 84 offspring.
That's terrifying.
Keep in mind that the rats, the offspring that the rat is having, can also reproduce within that year as well. So the numbers can be very high, exponential.
Oh, rats.
Ugh.
Termites. They can cause an estimated $5 billion worth of structural damage per year. And that is not good. We are definitely going to talk about termite prevention and how to deal with it if you have the issue, because that's terrifying. And lastly, many pests, including rats, mice, mosquitoes, fleas, and ticks, can carry potentially deadly or life-threatening illnesses. I know that's definitely a fear locally with mosquitoes where I live. So it can be pretty scary.
Yeah, it's very uplifting to think about all these pests and the stuff that they carry.
Well, certainly the disease issue is a concern.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly as the climate changes and we get new and invading pests coming in and exotic diseases, that's something we need to be careful that we're looking at closely and make sure we can deal with that as it comes up. I want to go back to that rodent piece just for a minute.
Mm-hmm.
It's been said, and you can find this information online, and it's actually true, is about 20% of all fires in homes of unknown causes are caused by rodents.
Chewing through the wires and
Chewing
stuff.
throh wires and
Wow.
things like that. And I've actually experienced that situation where I've gone in and seen where that has happened. So, rodents not only is a disease issue mission critical there when we're trying to manage a rodent population in a home, but also just the physical structure, protecting the property itself, the home, it's critical that you take care of the rodents.
Well, Pat, we are so excited to have you here so we can talk about prevention and healthy ways to take care of all of these things.
Yeah, and before we dive in too deep, I want to ask you a bunch of questions. But before we do that, I just want to remind everybody that we have our voicemail box set up that you can call in and leave a suggestion or a comment or question for people like Pat at any time. It's 978-709-1040. And of course, we'd love for you to follow us on social media. We've got all the links in the show notes, or you can hit us up on Instagram at howtohome_guide.
Right. And we regularly check for
We do.
questions and comments there as well.
And make sure you guys subscribe to our email list so you don't miss an episode. You don't miss any of the content we put out. We're putting out content constantly throughout the week. So in between gaps in the show, you can always visit the website or check out any of the articles that go along with the podcast. So, and we want to take a minute and thank our founding partner of the How to Home podcast, which is FilterBuy. FilterBuy is, of course, an HVAC filter provider.
Yes, and you save 5% when you subscribe. So you just basically set it and forget it, and you never have to worry about ordering filters again. They're an amazing service.
It's super easy to sign up. You just go to their website and you can input your filter sizes, and they ship everything to you within 24 hours, including custom sizes.
Yep, and everything's made here in the USA. They're an awesome company. We recommend them.
Let's dive into some questions because obviously pest control is a very diverse and wide range episode. We could go into one specific bug for an entire episode probably, but let's talk about some very common household pests. Like what are some of the things or some of the critters or rodents that you encounter most often?
Well, you mentioned termites already. Certainly that one is pretty common. So we do see that in a lot of homes. And in California, we have both the drywood termites, which could invade from the top of the house and come on down. And we have termites that come up through the soil. So we have more termites here than you would get in most locations in the continental United States, probably with the exception of Florida and the deep south. I mean, they've got a lot of termite activity there as well. And then we have other pests that are pretty common. We were talking about spiders really before the start of the show, and that's one of the most common pests that we deal with. And there's various spiders that cause issues, things like black widows or brown widows here in Southern California. Less common in other parts of the country, but in other parts of the country they have things like brown recluse spiders. And in most homes, we don't really need to worry about either of those that much. It's more the spiders that get in can be an annoyance and cause a lot of webbing in the home and so on, makes an unsightly mess. And that will be your cellar spiders. Sometimes they're called daddy longlegs, but they're pretty common. We get those coming in all the time. And then ants are another big pest that homeowners experience. And ants, various species of ants, cause different things or do different things when they get into homes. Some of them will nest in the home. Most don't. They actually nest outside in soil and come in because conditions are appropriate for them to come in. They find some food or moisture that they want to be around and end up perhaps around a kitchen sink or in the bathroom. And people don't want to find the ants crawling across their toothbrush. Some folks will say that's merely a nuisance, but ants have been walking in a lot of places, and when they're walking on your toothbrush after walking on the bathroom floor, that may not be such a good idea. So.
I didn't realize that. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but you don't think about ants chugging water, You just look at it and you don't think about it being like them being attracted to water, but you find them primarily in a lot of wet environments, bathrooms, kitchens, stuff like that. Is it the water source that they're attracted to?
They are highly attracted to moisture sources. And in fact, most of the baits that are used for ants are highly moist, contain a lot of water. So for that reason, it's just the ants are more likely to feed on them rather than a drier product. And in fact, the ant themselves, when they pick them up, they pick up, say, a dry granular type bait, they'll feed that, take it back to the nest and feed it to the larvae. So it can be converted into a liquid and then fed to the worker foraging ants that are out there actually gathering that food source. Ants like a variety of foods, but moisture is mission critical for a lot of species. They want to be around areas where they can get sufficient moisture to survive and maintain the colony.
What are some tips that you can provide maybe for the average homeowner to minimize an issue before it starts?
Well, that's the focus. It should always be on a proactive approach where you're dealing with prevention rather than being reactive and thinking about, well, what can I treat with to get rid of these particular critters? Really don't want to ever let it get to that stage. And the way to do that is to think about the conditions conducive that bring in pests to the home. And there are some of these common sense items that we if we really think about it, say, yeah, that could encourage a pest. Stuff like having the trees overgrow your house. You want to keep those branches away. That'll keep things like rodents from getting on the roof and ending up coming in under tiles if it's a tile roof or through a gap around a chimney flashing and end up in an attic void or someplace like that. And then we have things like vegetation that's low growing, perhaps hedges around your home that are actually touching the home. And if you think about it, that makes a great bridge for an ant just to walk up, and they may be feeding on the honeydew being produced by the insects like aphids that are on that bush. And then from there, it's a very short walk across onto the home, and then they may be under the flashing where they could set up a nest. So that is critical that we deal with those kinds of things, and also excessive moisture around the outside of the home. We already hit on moisture sources inside as being attractive, but certainly outside as well. The one thing that homeowners tend not to do in areas where we have irrigation, and that's a lot of the country, is they don't think about maybe the north side of the house needs a little less irrigation than the south side of the house. That's something that will help keep the ants at bay a little bit if you don't overwater on the front, say, the front side of the house if it faces north, and pull the ants in. You can tell if you're overwatering simply because you start to see that greenish growth and the soil looks like it's saturated all the time. That's the kind of thing that's going to attract pests like ants and termites, in fact, as well, and other critters. So these are the things that we need to be thinking about, and then going into sealing up the house itself. There's a lot of steps there, just simple things like door sweeps wear out, replacing them on a fairly frequent basis. And then if you get any work done on your home, say you get a water heater installed and they want to run a drainage line outside, some emergency drainage line to the exterior, and the contractor may punch a hole in the wall that's 2 inches in diameter and then put a 3/4 inch pipe through that hole, and it never gets sealed up. So a lot of things can come in through a gap that's an inch in size.
Such good tips.
Yeah. So are there any products out there that you can recommend, let's say, for sealing around a hole like that? I know I've used some of the expanding spray foams and some of the things like that. Do you recommend any of those types of products, or is there something out there that you can recommend to really seal off an entry point maybe?
All right. Well, I wouldn't say staying away from an expanding foam 100% of the time, but it is not one of my favorite materials for this kind of thing. For one thing, the critters can actually chew right through it. And for another, and that's a lot of critters. Some insects will do that, like bees when they're nesting inside, they'll chew through that kind of thing. Yeah. Rodents certainly can go through that. Termites will go through that, and then it's hidden. So that's an issue with it as well, as it can hide an infestation. Doesn't really provide an effective seal in many instances. So you want to use a good grade caulk that's made for that. And if it's a crack in concrete you're trying to seal, some type of elastomeric product, some type of epoxy. We all know that epoxy can be cured, and that's absolutely critical. If you have something that has a little give to it, but it provides a good seal, whereas some of those foams just don't do that. So you want to be careful what types of materials you use and use the appropriate one. Really, if the work is extensive, I would get a professional to do that kind of work. So, and the same goes with the pest management situation. If you truly have wood destroying insects, if you have things like honeybees in a wall void, or if you have a bed bug issue, and yes, they're real, then you want to be calling in a professional. If there's more than one of something, at least get a good identification so that you know what you're dealing with. As misidentification is another thing that happens all the time, and people will do something that they probably shouldn't do, and it just makes the issue that much worse.
Okay, so once we've identified that there's an issue and we're thinking about calling in professionals, I'm a parent, Aaron is. My number one concern, and I have an animal, is safety. When I hear chemicals or, poison, bait, those words set off an alarm for me. How safe are the things on the market, and what should we be using if we have those concerns?
Well, those are all legitimate concerns, and certainly the products that are on the market are EPA registered, and they're there for a reason. I mean, we're in the 21st century now, so materials that are out there, if used according to the proper directions, may be effective for the purpose claimed. But the deal is to try to stay away from using any type of product if you don't have to. For example, if it's one or two ants that are getting inside, if you simply clean up the area where they're walking, those are likely just foragers that have come in and looking for a food source. And if they don't find it, they're not likely going to bring in the rest of the troops to do that foraging. And that goes back to the other piece there about sealing up the home and making sure that you don't have those conditions conducive, being proactive in order to prevent the use of any type of products. So if it's a case of where you need to make an application of a product, you're probably better off ensuring that it's done professionally and have a professional come in and do that type of work. But they want to look at the home as well. They may tell you that you don't need to do any of that, that it may be a case of, here's the plan. We're going to deal with the root cause. It's outside. We're going to deal with it out there, and maybe nothing that we have to do inside at all. So a professional is also well-trained. They're licensed. They're aware that, people have children. They've got pets. Any materials that they put down, they would be in tamper-resistant type stations, out of the reach of children or pets and all that. That's all mandated, and people are aware of that. They have to be. Mm-hmm. So it's more of coming up with a comprehensive plan depending on the individual situation and applying all the different techniques that are a part of what we call integrated pest management, which is using all kinds of different tools, not just products of different types, but perhaps bringing that common sense factor in and doing that exclusion work and doing that education work. Well, this isn't really something you need to worry about. It just came in through an open window. That education piece is mission critical. So bringing in a professional might be the very best option.
I was wondering if you could talk to us about some preventative tips for a place like a playhouse to avoid, something that could be dangerous to your children outside.
Sure. A great tool for managing pests around the playhouse, and actually even from keeping them from getting established, is a vacuum cleaner. So if you reach for that vacuum cleaner and you go in with a crack and crevice tool and you just go ahead and hit all the corners and edges and so on, and then you can remove the webbing with a brush or with the vacuum itself. And that takes care of anything that might be inside. Outside, look for why they may be coming to that particular playhouse or structure or whatever it is, and see if you can mitigate that somehow. And by that, I mean, if you've got a lot of bushes right around that area, maybe cut them back a little bit, trim them back so that it's not as much overgrowth in there. Okay. If there's a lot of irrigation going on, well, maybe we don't need quite so much there. Or maybe we can put a gravel strip around that playhouse, and that'll keep a lot of critters out as well. And maybe there's some openings or holes that could be sealed up, just so because we know, that's where something seems to be coming in all the time.
So mostly you're focusing around the foundation, right? Which is why they're spraying kind of the thing around the foundation of the home. So you're having, in my house specifically, I have a crawl space under my home, and there's like these access points, to get into the crawl space. And one of the big things that I've had to do is put, grates on them of some kind because they were wide open. And I've had so many problems I had a possum that got under my house and ended up dying in an old piece of stuff down there, and I had to pull it out, and it was not one of my favorite things to do because I found out what it was that was under there. And then up in the attic, right? So if you're talking about trimming the trees back, so you've got foundation, you've got the attic. Those are kind of or the roof structure, kind of two very common entry points. So if you can minimize access points on the roof and in the foundation, you're probably going to mitigate a lot of the issue, right?
Certainly you are. And if you take a look at the yard itself, why is that? Why are things being attracted to my home? If you've got a very heavy cover in the backyard and a lot of bushes, a lot of trees, and it's a very thick overgrowth, expect to have critters in there. You've just created a home for them, a microenvironment that's perfect for even things like mosquitoes, because they like that higher humidity that you're going to get in around bushes like that.
Yeah, and like ponds and stuff, like standing water type little garden ponds.
I have a fountain at my house, and I've got to make sure I keep that clean and the water flowing all the time, or I'm going to end up with mosquitoes breeding in it. So,
and that's potentially dangerous. Mosquitoes can carry some not so awesome diseases.
For sure.
Mosquitoes are a concern in some parts of the country more than in others, but in terms of disease activity. But certainly they're a concern to everybody as a nuisance factor, and we don't want to be encouraging them to be around the home. And it's something where if you can discourage them a little bit simply by trimming back your bushes a little bit and maybe reducing that irrigation and keeping the water flowing in that fountain, why not do it? And the other thing is look for containers of water. That mosquitoes can breed in something like a flower pot, or the saucer for a flower pot. So make sure the water doesn't stay in there.
Or a wheelbarrow. I've had that issue.
Or a
where
wheelbarrow.
I've had a wheelbarrow outside and the rain, it rains and you don't think to go empty the wheelbarrow after, a week of it raining. And if it hasn't evaporated all out of there, standing water, you get mosquitoes.
Yeah, and the kids have water tables, buckets, all of that.
That's it. And we had one house where it was a situation, the home had been abandoned for a while and the water was left in the toilet and the mosquitoes were breeding right in the toilet in the house.
So let's talk about maybe a few specific things, and I'll just go off of my own experience. There's insect-wise, one of the big issues we've had is ants. Rodent-wise, I've had rats, which I'm not accustomed to. Being from the Northeast, we had, field mice and things like that usually, but never rats. So that's new to me, and they gave me the heebie-jeebies like you wouldn't believe. And I've dealt a lot with those in our home. Roof rats, I'm assuming, because they're always up in the attic, and they come down. And then exterior-wise, another rodent that we've dealt with a lot is like gophers and ground squirrels. So maybe we can touch a little bit on maybe those couple things and have some suggestions for how to treat, manage, trap, that type of thing. So what are your suggestions as far as if I have an ant problem? If I'm getting the large trails coming through my house, where do you suggest that I start?
Well, I'm glad you mentioned trails because specific species of ants do different things. Some we call tramp ants, which is kind of a loose term. But here in California, we have a group of ants, or a species of ants, the Argentine ant, which is one of these tramp ants. And they will make these trails. And they will just go in and forage on an area. They find food, and next thing you know, all the workers are headed in that direction. So you get these massive trails going in. So what you want to do is kind of disrupt that. You want to make sure that there isn't something that's going to allow them to get into your home. That crack isn't present. And then when you put down, say, a pet food, something like that, if it's outside, take it up. Don't leave it in place for any length of time. Take it up as soon as the critter has had a chance to feed. If it's indoors, once again, you don't want to leave it down too long, but you can leave it perhaps a little bit longer. But if the ants find that kind of stuff, they can end up in your home very, very quickly. So it's a case of not drawing them inside. That's the very mission critical thing to be thinking about. So making sure that house is sealed up, the cracks are, and that you don't have something that's attracting them. People don't even think about what happens when they put a rose bush right next to, say, their home, on the patio right next to the house, so it's even touching the house. Well, take a rose bush, for example, that's going to attract things like aphids. And unless you're managing that aphid issue that's on that rose bush, you're going to get the ants coming to feed on this particular type of ant, likes to feed on aphid honeydew, which is with the excess sugars that they produce. And it'll work the ants the ants will work the aphids just like cows. So they're right there. Then you have them right next to the door. And then if there's some reason they're going to be drawn inside and it doesn't take much, away they go. They're inside. They're into your pet food. They're into that stuff, that soda syrup that's spilled somewhere that never got cleaned up. So certainly sanitation, good maintenance are mission critical when we're dealing with ants, and not encouraging their development. Keeping them away from the house and out of the home altogether is probably the best solutions.
And I'm thinking that probably applies to almost any issue you're having. If you're focusing on cleanliness, being mindful of what you're planning or putting out around your house, sealing up any entry points. Is that pretty much true for any? It's
true for a lot of pests. There are other ways that these critters can get inside. So if we think about deliveries, for example, particularly cardboard cartons, that's something that really seems to bring in the bugs. You get cockroaches that like to live in the corrugate for that cardboard. And even things like rodents can be in a box of some kind that gets delivered. So,
here's your Amazon package, complete with rat.
Well, it's entirely possible. When I was younger and going to school, I remember furnishing my apartment. Didn't have a lot of money. I furnished my apartment, and we'll call it an early American student, where you go out on the street and you see that sofa or whatever, and you bring it inside. I wouldn't recommend that, especially today when we have such a resurgence in bed bugs. If you want to get a bed bug issue in your home, then that's a good way to do it. So I know that wasn't ones you were asking about, but just be cognizant, be aware that deliveries can be impactful as well.
I found that in my experience with the ants specifically, there's a company called Taro, I believe. They make it's like a liquid borax trap of some kind, or they take it back to the colony. That to me has been the best that I've been able to find as far as kind of getting rid of the ants that have already established themselves. But I know there's a ton of different products out there. That one seems to work well for me in the instances that I've had a lot of ants.
Boric acid makes an excellent bait. So that is a product that can be used as a bait for ants, and it just depends on the species of ant, whether they're going to go for it and what type of concentration it has to be at. So you've been fortunate in that what you've come up with has worked for you, but don't overlook those other things, being that proactive approach where you want to deal with all the other things so you don't need to put the baits out for ants. So that's really the way we look at it in the industry. We try to use as few products as possible because we're focused on trying to eliminate the root cause for these critters, how they're getting in and why they're getting in.
So what's the workflow? It's if I called out Orkin, for example, they would come take a look around the house, see what conditions are present, what types of things might be conducive to various pests, and then they would recommend some kind of treatment plan to kind of abate that, or maybe set up some traps and things like that to get rid of the current infestation, let's say, and then it's just management from there on.
Well, exactly that. You missed a key step, though, is first identify just exactly what it is. You might think it's one thing, and it's an entirely different type of insect. Or you might think, oh, I've got a mouse issue, and it's a rat issue. So you want them to do that identification piece. There may be some monitoring involved where they're going to need to come back and look and see just where they're finding the most activity. But overall, you're right. That's the best approach, is to take a proactive approach, look for those conducive conditions, give you a plan on how to correct them, and do some of those things that on your behalf to correct them, not just make the recommendations. So there may be some simple sealing work that the technician could do and will do for you, and they'll let you know that. So all that is part of the plan.
In terms of the roof rats, we're talking about rats a little bit. I've read somewhere that once they kind of get in there and they nest, or have utilized the space for a long time and they get their scents on it and all that stuff, that it can actually attract more rats in the future. Is that true?
That is true. They can pull other rats in.
Can't catch a break.
Rats, everywhere they go, they leave a little bit of scent from their fur and so on, and you get what we call rub marks in the industry, and that's basically sebum. And you see these blackish little marks around an opening, and anything that's being used a lot, you'll find a lot of those marks around the opening. And yes, they will attract other rats. Once they're inside, it says, hey, I got a great place to live here, so come on in. But there is a hierarchy involved. It's a little more complicated than just saying the straight attraction, because there may be an alpha rat that may discourage some other rats from coming in. But in general, you're absolutely right. Yeah, if a rat finds an opening, another rat's going to find that same opening.
Do you have an attic?
Yes, and that's the issue. And I've only been in the house for 4 years, so they had a lot of issues prior to our moving in. But the attic is just a mess of insulation that's been contaminated with rat feces and all that stuff. And it's just, when I go up there, I just feel like it's an absolute nightmare. And, we've had some issues since we've been there, but to your point, I've been spending a lot of time trying to minimize those entry and access points. I found a lot of stuff where there was just enough hole. Like you're saying, you look at these rats and you're like, oh my God, they're, good size. And you look at these holes and you're like, how does it fit through that? And you'd be surprised at how small the hole that they can actually get through. And then they get up there and they make a nest and they chew through everything. And oh my God, I need new insulation up there anyway. And it's just like,
Well,
that's one thing that I probably will hire out because I just
absolutely, and you should. A lot of companies do that. Orkin does that work, and there are a lot of the pest management companies out there will do that kind
You
of
guys
work.
clean attic spaces?
Clean attics, install new installation, do some of the simple proofing that needs to happen, and many pest management companies do that. But to go back to that piece about what kind of opening it takes for them to get into. If you look at a mouse, something the size of a dime, I've seen a mouse go through a hole that was designed or drilled simply for the diameter of a coaxial TV cable. And a mouse has gone through that hole. If they can get their skull through, they can get through. For a rat, we're looking at a hole or opening about the diameter of a quarter. And they will make it larger. Even, no matter what the material is, they'll gnaw on it, whether it be concrete or flashing of some kind or wood. You'll get them to gnaw and make it a little bit larger so they can get in. So if they can start to get their head in, the critter's going to get inside.
I feel like I'm going to sleep covering my ears from now on.
It's such a huge task. I keep finding, like you're saying, it's just like little things, little spots, little dime holes, little things here and there, and it's enough. It's enough to get them in there.
It's very, very new homes and homes that are fairly old.
Yeah, that's my case. Issue. It's an old home.
Yeah.
And I think people don't realize you don't have to live in like a trashy, old, dirty house to have issues with pests.
Yeah,
because
it's
pretty shameful to when you like find a rat or something in your house, or we had cockroaches in our last house, and that's embarrassing. It's like,
well, it makes you feel dirty.
People.
It makes you feel like you're living in a dirty environment, and it's like I try to keep the house clean, but yet I still have these issues.
Yeah, it's just something as simple as, say, you rent a refrigerator, and bring it in. Mm-hmm. You can bring in cockroaches in that refrigerator. So, and you have a clean home, but you can bring in the cockroaches that way. So, a lot of ways that these critters can get in. And if the home is clean, you're unlikely to have, and very tidy, let's say very orderly, and there's not a lot of clutter, you're unlikely to have a very massive pest issue.
Right.
Because you've reduced a lot of that harborage and clutter where they're going to be hiding. But you can still have a pest issue. It's not reflection on you as somebody doing the cleaning, but it's really a reflection on the ability of these critters to take advantage of even small openings or different things that we as humans do in order to get inside.
I live in an equestrian area. My wife is big horses and stuff, and we actually use another bug to fight other bugs. We use, I don't remember what they're called, but there's some kind of ground-dwelling insect that you sprinkle on the ground in like their larval stage, and they actually eat the egg larva of the flies.
There are many insects out there like that, predators and parasitoids. They don't work so well in a truly urban situation, but on a farm like that or in a horse stable, they often get used, and they use those kinds of things in chicken houses as well.
Also, a lot of people around us use chickens to eat the fly larvae. One of the things, I believe it was my aunt that told me, I was having some bug issues with some of our roses and plants and stuff, and a little DIY thing that seemed to work okay for me was just watering with a little bit of dish soap. I don't know how good that is or bad that is, but it seemed to work pretty well.
For a lot of the plant-sucking insects, that's a good approach. But you have to look at what's the latest recommendations are, and you wouldn't want to use anything that would damage the plant or would be counterproductive to use.
Are there mistakes, like DIY common household mistakes that people make?
Absolutely. And one thing would be, say, installing a screen that has the wrong size mesh on it. They want to keep perhaps flies out of a place, but they're not thinking, well, I got to keep the rats and larger critters out as well. So maybe I need to put a backing screen that's got a 1/4 inch or 1/8 inch mesh on it, and then over top of that I can put a fly screen, depending on how much ventilation they need. But if you're looking at a vent in a crawl space or something like that, you want to be careful how you actually seal that up. And mistakes people make is they may seal that space up tightly, and that would cause, perhaps if it's not insulated appropriately, certainly you can do that if you insulate it appropriately and manage it the right way with a dehumidifier perhaps. It's something that's done in a lot of parts of the country. But if you don't do that, you just increase the moisture under there, and that's going to draw a lot of critters in. And certainly that would be a condition that'd be conducive to termite activity, increase the moisture that's in the wood in your foundation. Or you just simply bring in other critters because you've increased that moisture and just made it a place where they can live. So that's a mistake that homeowners make. Another one that is pretty common is they wait too long before they call in a professional. So it's more than one critter. They go out to the store or whatever and bring back something and dump it all over the place and hope that that's going to solve the issue. A little bit does the job. Maybe I'll just use a little more. And that can be a serious mistake, because when the professional does get called in, then they've got this issue to deal with that, we've got all this other stuff now. And it's not mitigated the pest at all, but it's just made for, another issue. Maybe you've got some type of contamination issue caused by the wrong type of treatment. And then when you do bring in a material from a store, sometimes folks use a little bit up and then they say, well, this container's open now, I'll put it in another container, and it could be a food container. And that happens occasionally where that mistakes get made like that, or they make up a mix and it goes into a bottle that goes on a shelf and somebody thinks it's something else and takes a drink of it or eats it or whatever. So they can be their own worst enemies, and certainly not locking things in a cabinet. All of these things that we think about if we step back a little bit and say, well, there were a lot of critters here, or I'm not sure what this is. I really should get a professional. You really should get the professional, have them come in, and they'll do an assessment and give you a plan. And if you don't want to go with it, that's your option, but at least you know what you're dealing with and have a step in the right direction.
So it seems like there are a lot of preventative measures and a lot of things to keep track of and be aware of that might be difficult to remember all of them. I'm just curious, does Orkin have some sort of online resource or checklist that people can refer to? Certainly we'll put them in our show notes as well.
Absolutely. On the webpage for Orkin, you can get a lot of tips, very useful tips that will help you with some of the things that we've been talking about today. And just reviewing that and making sure that you've got those implemented at home is going to have a big impact on keeping the critters out.
Just adding it to your cleaning routine. I
think identification of the problem is part of it. Sometimes you'll find like things around the home. Like, for example, when I didn't have a lot of experience with termites, being from the Northeast, a different type of termites. And I would find this little, fine powdery stuff kind of around my home. And I'd be like, what is that? Where's that coming from? It looks like, little dust kind of. And turns out it's like termite frass. And it takes a lot of research to identify what problem you have. So I think finding a resource or figuring out what the problem is half the battle of the homeowner. And maybe you save yourself a lot of headache by calling somebody in or helping you identify what it is exactly that you do have a problem with.
For sure.
Particularly things like termites. That's something where you're going to need a professional to
and you don't see them,
it. Right?
Most of the time. It's like you see evidence of, or by the time you do see evidence of, it's progressed quite a bit.
Right, and there's a lot of hidden areas, and they may have to get access to those areas and know how to do that and have the right equipment to determine just what is going on within the whole house.
The fumigation tents, you see them on homes all the time for termites. You have all your stuff in the home, and that is, you get your house tented, and how much of that stays behind? That's the whole thing, is like, do you feel like you have to clean everything about the house after something like that happens? How safe is that? Obviously, it's deemed safe, but is there anything left behind from that gas or residue that you should be aware of that?
No, you kind of hit the nail on the head there when you say it is a gas that's used, and it is. There is a gas that's used. It's put in. It's under that envelope or tent. It's maintained for a period of time depending on what type of critter you're trying to get. But there are different wood-destroying insects other than just termites that may require a longer period. But once they remove the tent and ventilate it, and then there's equipment that's used to determine the gas levels, and it has to be well below any kind of limit set by the state or the feds before that home can be turned over to the homeowner. You have to keep in mind that some of these materials will require that you have to bag food, so there is some annoyance with it. It may have to take plants outside because they can be, damaging to plants, so you want to get those out. And then, of course, you're going to be out of the home, and it could be a couple, 3 days that you're out of your home, and people don't really like that. So it's a big deal. It's something that you have to think about and take the advice from a professional before you really go too far down that road. Or, as you mentioned, a lot of real estate transactions require that this happens. So homes are tended quite often for that reason. And here in Southern California, somewhere between 7 and 10 years, if your house is on the coast, it's likely going to have to be fumigated.
One of the questions that may be a barrier to most people is like, what is it? Okay, yeah, I can bring in a professional, but what's that going to cost me? You know, from a budget perspective, what does it cost to bring in somebody from an outside, maybe from a consultation standpoint, or maybe not a whole treatment plan specifically, but just to have somebody come in and help you identify what it is and what the problem is and maybe suggest some things? Is there a range that type of thing falls in?
There is a range. It depends on the pest and the conditions and what the type of structure is involved. Assessments can be everything from very, very low dollars to more extensive, depending on how much time is spent to actually make a full evaluation as to what's going on and to come up with an appropriate treatment strategy. Some companies don't charge very much for that type of work. Some charge a little more. It just depends on the time that's going to be spent there and the type of critter that's being looked for and what the treatment strategy is going to be in the end.
I will say, because I have Orkin specifically, and it's very affordable for our size home. And I feel like the damage that could be caused for not paying for it, like preventatively, would outweigh the price of having things dealt with and maintained. It's kind of my thought process.
I've spent quite a bit of money on, DIY products, like abatement products and things from live traps to, just ant baits and all sorts of stuff. I mean, I've bought everything that's seemingly on the market, from rats to gophers to ants to termites to Jupiter crickets, which I didn't even know existed until recently.
Man.
That's the thing. These things are the creepiest looking things I've ever seen.
Yeah, definitely.
But I've spent a ton of money on those things over months and years at a time. And so to me, it's like, okay, well, if I'm equating, at least I know what I'm dealing with. If I can bring in somebody and have them take a look at it and say, okay, this is what your problem is. Here's how I would recommend to treat it. Is it worth it? Maybe. I mean, at this point, for me, it probably is, because of the amount of money I've spent.
I would say that's the thing, is to be proactive and be thinking about it. I mean, if we go back to your termite example, it might be a case of where you just have a small area that's infested and a simple directed treatment is all that's required. So you mentioned it could be very affordable. So you want to get that assessment made by a professional. So have them call them in earlier rather than later.
Right, and your environment has a huge plays a huge part in it. So where we live, I find it necessary to have constant maintenance because we're right by a riverbed, like right over our fence. But again, that maintenance might not be necessary for everyone. So I'm not saying you have to have it, but it is affordable for us and worth it for sure.
So when I bought the home, I had a fumigation done, termite fumigation done. How long is that typically good for? Should I look to have the house retreated again in a certain amount of time?
Well, most companies that do that work, they will, or the company that recommends it. So here in California, a lot of it is done. The inspections are done by a termite company and or a division of a pest management company, and the fumigation is done by a company that specializes in fumigation. In some other parts of the country, the whole package comes together. So it just depends on which part of the country you're in and which company you're dealing with. But anybody would put in at least an annual assessment, coming in and say, hey, we'll come back annually, and for a very small fee, make an inspection of that home and determine what's going on. And they'll even put in a type of warranty on that service as well. So for very small money, you get a lot of peace of mind.
So I certainly don't want mice or rats or anything in my home, but I don't want them to suffer either. So can we talk about some humane ways to deal with pest control?
Well, the ways that the pest management professionals use are largely set up to eliminate issues within the home and not cause any harm to non-target animals, or it's just you're trying to deal with a particular pest issue. You come up with a comprehensive plan, and for the most part, that does not involve the use of any kind of products that's going to cause direct harm to any kind of critter. If it's something that's an occasional critter that's coming into the home, like a raccoon or something, we'll often just trap and it makes sure that they get taken care of. If it's more than one or two of these things, then we need to have perhaps a wildlife company, and there are divisions of Orkin that do that service, come and handle that type of situation. But the work that we do is focused on just dealing with the particular pest issue, taking a proactive approach, preventing them from getting in, and not trying to do any harm to anything that's a non-target animal. It's something you're walking a very tight rope there, where you got to be careful what you do, and that's why you really want to use a professional and have them come in and make that right assessment and use the right tools, so that we don't have any issues with non-targets.
Are there any DIY products that you recommend the average homeowner like keep on hand, just as from a management or maintenance perspective? Like, should a homeowner have some kind of perimeter spray, in their shed?
What's more important, Aaron, I think, would be for them to have the tools that they need just to determine what's going on and how extensive it is. So a flashlight. Here in earthquake country, everybody should have a working flashlight, very handy. So that's one tool that I'd have. And then simply, perhaps something as simple as a multi-tool, so that they can open up a cabinet or take a vent off and take a look inside. That's another tool that they should have. Some sealant of some kind. So if there's a small opening or hole that can be sealed up, maybe just some silicone type sealant, which will work on a lot of little openings. I wouldn't recommend keeping a lot of pesticides around, in that that's something that you may not use it very often, and then it just becomes something sitting on a shelf and is a bit of a hazard just because it's sitting on that shelf and could end up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
I keep my stuff in my shed now that I recently remodeled a shed, and that was one of the things. I had stuff everywhere, and I do have some chemical stuff and some different things around, and I have a locking cabinet now that I keep everything locked up in this cabinet, thankfully, just because now I have a young son. I don't want him getting into any of that stuff. So there's actually the shed itself locks, and then inside the shed is another locking cabinet. So if you do have any of that stuff around, I highly suggest that you keep it locked up. And
very, very good way. And you keep it in wherever possible in the original container with the label on it.
Yeah, and if you end up putting stuff in a clear spray bottle of something, and it's a poison or whatever, make sure you clearly label it, obviously, because you don't want somebody thinking that's a cleaning product or something, and you're spraying down your countertops with a insecticide or something.
All of those things happen. Definitely, any material that you do use, you want to get a small quantity, just exactly what you need. Try to use it up so that you don't keep a lot of stuff around the home.
I've heard a rumor that you can actually use a dog to sniff out certain pests. Is that true?
Absolutely true. It's not a rumor. Dogs can be used for a lot of things. Well, we all know that they're used in the war front, definitely, to try to find dangerous ordnance and so on. And on the domestic side, we have used dogs for a long time in the pest management industry. They were originally used for things like termites. So there was one company that specialized in producing animals, trained dogs, that is, that could be used to sniff out termite infestations. It really didn't work as well as everybody had hoped, just because the dog can't get everywhere around a structure or can't go up a ladder that easily.
Right.
So it kind of died on the vine, but I well remember that. That was a number of years ago, and that was a big push. But dogs have made a comeback in a couple of situations, and probably the one that you've heard about the most, is for bedbugs. And they're particularly efficient at determining if there's a low-level bedbug infestation that may be present in a home or in a business. And they can go around and they will have some type of alert. It could be where they simply sit down and look at the spot where they think there might be a bed bug, and then you can dig in with your tools and so on, see if there is in fact a bug there. But it's primarily useful for clearing to determine if there's a pest problem present, or if you've done some work to eliminate a pest problem, that they are truly gone. So you'd bring the dog in sometime after you've done that treatment just to make an assessment. So Orkin has an entire division with dogs. And there are other companies out there that use dogs as well. So we do find they're very effective. We use them in homes, we use them in hotels, and we use them in other businesses.
Man, my dog is lazy.
I know. I got a dog. She doesn't do anything.
She doesn't do anything. Mine doesn't either. She brings the bugs in.
There's a lot of training involved, and they have to be trained every year and certified. But not only that, there's this training that you have to do pretty much on a daily basis, and more intensive training every week, because the dog has to be encouraged to kind of, all right, this is what you're looking for, this is what you're looking for, and so they understand. And the other thing you can't do is overwork the dog. So they can only work so many hours before they start to get a little bored. And then the rewarding, how are you going to do that? Some people, when they use the dogs, they use a food reward. It doesn't tend to work as well as a play reward. You know, some type of toy you can play with the dog when it's found its thing. So that's kind of how you do it, but it's very effective. And we find that dogs are still one of the most useful tools when it comes to things like bed bugs.
So we actually got a few questions in from some of our audience via social media and stuff. And I'd like to dive into some of those right now, if you don't mind.
Absolutely. Let's go for it.
So the first one is, I have rats and traps don't seem to work. I've been told if I use poison, they will die in the walls. So what can I do?
Well, in that case, if they're rats, and I'm seeing that it's plural here, you probably do want to get a professional to come in and make an assessment and use the right equipment. And one thing that we do is we use things like cameras to determine where the rats are running, or we may use black lights to determine where activity is present. And we know what to look for, where to look for it. So it really behooves you, if you've got a rat issue like that, to have a professional come in and make an assessment. It may be that you want to use traps. It may be that you want to do something else, but or even use a different type of trap. And how it's placed is critical as well. So a professional will know all of that.
And to that point, if you poison them, they will die in the walls, because I've done that, and that does happen.
I've been told that bed bugs don't bite people who have alcohol in their bloodstream. Is that true? Should I drink to go to sleep? So basically, should we stay pickled all the time?
Bed bugs will bite people even if they have alcohol in their bloodstream. There is some research that shows that certain antibiotics can affect bed bugs, but I don't recommend that you pile in the antibiotics in order to try to affect your bed bugs. But
that's my preventative measure. Just drink Robitussin to fall asleep every night. No bed bugs.
No, they can still be attracted to the people. The stimulants, that what's attracting them to you are still present. The odors that you put off and the carbon dioxide, they orient to that. That's from breath, and they can bite.
Okay.
How do you know that you have a bed bug problem? You're waking up with bites all over?
That's something, if it's a low-level issue, it's kind of difficult to determine. And not just because the bed bugs are cryptic and like to hide and all that, but the bites or the welts, if you're getting bit by bed bugs, may not appear for several days afterwards. So where did it happen? You know, did this happen at home or maybe somewhere else? And you can't say that for sure. If it's a low-level issue, then the bed bugs are harder to find. But one thing that a bed bug does is, after it eats, it looks for a place where it can defecate and then a little harbored spot where it's going to go in. So that defecation causes a little bit of stain on, say, a mattress cover. And they like to harbor in places like the seams of a mattress or a box spring, or perhaps the headboard on a bed. I'm just even talking about a bed here. And there are other places where you can find them as well. So looking for little flecks of dried blood, looking for maybe as they grow, they kind of cast off their skin as the little immature stages grow. Looking for those cast skins, looking for the live bugs in the seams. And if there's any kind of moderate to heavy infestation, they're going to start to show up. It's when we have the small ones, the smaller infestations, where it's just a few bugs, it's a little harder to find. And that's when we want to kind of bring in the dog and maybe do a little digging in with some tools and lights and so on.
Are there any considerations for people who live in apartments, for people that are in spaces that might have
shared walls
issues? Yeah.
Well, certainly apartments are under a service agreement with a pest control company. Orkin does a lot of apartment complexes. So if you see something in your apartment, you don't know what it is, and you're a little nervous about this, okay, now where did this come from? Always a good idea to let the property manager know, and then they can get a positive ID. If you have a specimen, that can get turned in, and an ID can be made, and then a plan can be put together if in fact you have something. Could be something just flew in through the window or crawled in through a crack, or it's not mission critical.
Sometimes I feel like there's a bug crawling on my skin, but I look and there's nothing there. Are skin mites or tiny bugs that live on you common? How can I counter that?
Well, there are certainly things like dust mites that get on people, and there's mites that live in the hair follicles and in the eyebrows and so on, follicle mites. I mean, we have a lot of these little critters that are associated with us, and you can think about lice too, as unpleasant as it sounds. But true bugs that you can't identify, you're probably going to need some professional assistance there. It may be that there's something that is like a bedbug, a low-level bedbug infestation, or it may be something else entirely. It could be an environmental condition, which is not unusual. And it could be something that's caused by a medication. So it may not be a bug issue at all.
Hair movement, arm hair movement on your arm. Sometimes you're like, oh, what's on me? Nothing.
Yeah.
All we have to do is talk about bugs. And people really
your skin starts crawling
sure.
and it's like, oh man, I got a bug on me right now.
Oh, when you see one, it's like, oh, I hate that feeling.
Well, Pat, thank you so much for being here. I think we've learned a ton of things. Obviously, we could spend a lot more time on all the various different critters that are out there, but I think you've offered some really great advice to the average person on how to kind of prevent and maintain or manage a problem before it starts. And we just can't thank you enough for being here. And if we ever do any future episodes, we'd love to have you back, and maybe dive in further.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the invitation. I know that Orkin appreciated it as well. And it's always fun to come and talk about bugs a little bit and the good and the bad and help people as best we can, because that's what we're trying to maintain health for folks and maintain their property.
For people who may want a little bit more information about a specific critter problem that they have or something, where's the best place for them to go to get additional info?
The best place would be our website, and that's just orkin.com. Gives you a lot of great information, and you can actually go to various links from that site to get additional information. It's tied into a lot of different sites that will give you valuable tips that you can use.
And can you actually request a quote or a visit or anything right through the website?
Absolutely can.
Well, we want to thank you guys for listening or watching the podcast, however you're choosing to consume it. And please be sure to follow us on social media at the links in the show notes. And make sure you subscribe to our email list. We put new content out all the time. So if you want to make sure to never miss anything, please make sure to subscribe to that email list.
Yeah, and if there's anything you want to learn from our show or any guests you'd love to see on, tag them, leave us comments, give us feedback. We love to hear from you.
And if you want to call in, you can also reach our voicemail at 978-709-1040. Call us 24 hours a day. Leave a question, comment, guest suggestion, whatever you want to do. We're always available. And we want to thank our founding partner of the show, FilterBuy, for making this episode possible. And once again, Pat, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
And we'll see you guys next time.
The How To Home podcast is brought to you by FilterBuy.com, your one-stop direct-to-consumer replacement air filter brand, and is produced in collaboration by Amassed Media Group, LLC, and Intelligent Arts and Artists. The show is executive produced by George Ruiz and Aaron Massey.